There is a person in every room who never seems to speak much. They sit with a calm, unreadable expression. They don't rush to fill the silence. They don't compete for attention. And most people around them assume they must not have much going on inside. That assumption is one of the most profound mistakes in human psychology. Because that person? They have already noticed the tension between two people across the room who haven't spoken to each other all evening. They've clocked the forced smile on someone's face that doesn't quite reach their eyes. They've felt the subtle shift in energy the moment someone walked in. They registered all of it, without saying a single word. This is the psychology of the silent observer. And it is not emptiness. It is not disinterest. It is not social anxiety dressed up as calm. It is one of the most sophisticated forms of human intelligence. The mind of a silent observer is never truly still. While others are talking, they are translating. They are reading body language, detecting micro-expressions, measuring the gap between what someone says and what their behavior reveals. They are processing at a depth that most people never reach, because most people are too busy performing to ever truly observe. And here is what psychology tells us about this: the quieter a person is on the outside, the more their inner world demands of them. The silence is not absence. It is where all the real work is happening. But here is something that took many of these people years, sometimes an entire painful chapter of their lives, to fully understand. Their silence was never the problem. The problem was what happened when they broke it. Because at some point, most silent observers tried. They opened up. They shared what they noticed. They expressed what they felt. And what they received in return was dismissal, ridicule, or something even quieter and more damaging, indifference. People who looked back at them with blank eyes, as if the depth they had just offered meant absolutely nothing. And so the psychology of self-protection began to form. What the outside world reads as shyness, as passivity, as someone who simply has nothing to say, is in reality a deeply internalized boundary. One that wasn't built overnight. It was constructed slowly, brick by brick, through every moment their voice was met with misunderstanding. Through every time they trusted someone with their inner world and watched that person treat it carelessly. Psychology refers to this as learned emotional guardedness. And it is not a flaw in the person. It is an intelligent adaptation to an environment that repeatedly proved it was not safe to be fully seen. Their silence became armor. Not because they are weak, but because they are deeply aware of who has earned the right to hear them. And that kind of discernment? That is not withdrawal from the world. That is one of the highest forms of emotional self-respect a person can develop. Now here is where the psychology becomes something most people never talk about. Because there is a cost to seeing clearly in a world that prefers comfortable illusions. The silent observer doesn't just notice surface behavior. They go deeper. They detect the hidden agenda beneath a generous gesture. They feel the resentment living inside a polite smile. They sense when someone's words and energy are pointing in completely opposite directions. They know, often before the situation unfolds, exactly where things are heading. And that knowing is not a gift that feels like a gift. Most of the time, it feels like a weight. Because here is the psychological reality of carrying that level of awareness: you cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unfeel what you have detected. And yet, in most social environments, voicing that awareness is not safe. It is not welcomed. It is labeled as overthinking, as paranoia, as being too sensitive. So they stay silent. Again. But this time, the silence is different. It is not peaceful. It is the silence of someone holding something heavy, completely alone. Psychology identifies this experience as the burden of hyperperceptiveness. And over time, without an outlet, without even one person who can hold that level of depth with them, it accumulates. It becomes exhaustion that sleep cannot fix. A loneliness that crowds cannot cure. A disconnection that has nothing to do with the number of people around them. They are not antisocial. They are overwhelmed by how much they feel in spaces where no one else seems to feel anything at all. And yet, despite all of that weight, despite the exhaustion, the misunderstanding, the loneliness of seeing too much and saying too little, there is something quietly extraordinary living inside the silent observer. A world that most people will never have access to. Because while the outside world has often failed them, their inner world never has. It is where their real conversations happen. The ones that go beyond small talk, beyond surface pleasantries, beyond the noise of performance and ego. In that internal space, they think with a clarity that is rare. They feel with an intensity that is profound. They create, they reflect, they understand human behavior at a level that most people spend entire lifetimes never reaching. Psychology tells us that the deepest forms of self-awareness are almost always born in solitude. And the silent observer has lived there long enough to know themselves in ways that constant external validation could never teach. But here is the mindset shift that matters. Here is where the healing begins. Your silence is not something that needs to be fixed. Your depth is not a disorder. Your inability to connect with shallow spaces is not a failure, it is a standard. A standard your soul has set for the kind of connection, the kind of conversation, the kind of presence it is willing to accept. The world will not always understand the psychology of someone who observes everything and says nothing. But you were never asking for the world's understanding. You were waiting, quietly, patiently, for the one or two souls who are capable of earning it. And that kind of peace? That is not isolation. That is internal freedom.